Beruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together. Daf Ayin Zayin Amud Beis. Starting with Daf Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph. 6 lines from the bottom. Our Mishnah enumerates 5 different korbanos tzibur that are doiche es hatuma. The Amorim in our Gemara take on Aleph, that the fact that it's doiche es hatuma is only dechuya, it's not hutra, which requires therefore the tzitz of the Kohen Gadol to then bring a ritzui for that tuma. Secondly, the tzitz that is meratze is not meratze al achilois, which means that the very things that would be eaten, whether it's going to be flour or the breads of the shtei halechem, or even the meat of the korbanos and the shlamim, for example. So all of those, the tzitz is not meratze to bring a ritzui for the achilois, and therefore that would indicate that over here this would not therefore be a valid korban, and therefore it would not be doiches hatuma. That leads us into the question, because our Mishnah does say it's doiche es hatuma. Says the Mishnah, the Gemara, Neima masnisin de loik Rabbi Yehoshua. Let us suggest that our Mishnah is not therefore authored by Rabbi Yehoshua. The Tanya, because Rabbi Yehoshua is going to teach us momentarily that when you do not have basar, then you don't have dam, and we don't have dam, you don't have basar. As follows. It states in the pasuk, and I'll read you the entire pasuk. Va'asisa oiloisecha, and you will make your korban oilois. Habasar v'hadom al mizbach Hashem Elokecha. The basar and the dam on the mizbech of Hashem. V'dam zvachecha yishofech al mizbach Hashem Elokecha, and the blood of your sacrifice shall be poured on the mizbeach. V'habasar toichel, and you shall eat the basar. That's the pasuk. Now the Gemara brings a brayso beginning with this pasuk. Va'asisa oilosecha basar v'hadam, and you shall perform your korban oilos, the basar and the dam. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, im ein dam, ein basar. V'im ein basar, ein dam. Since the pasuk puts the two together and says va'asisa oilosecha habasar v'hadam, therefore you require both of them. If you only have one without the other, then the other one is invalid as well. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Rabbi Eliezer agrees that if you don't have dam, you don't have basar. But he disagrees on the other din. He disagrees with Rabbi Yoshua, who says, Im ein basar ein dam. Says Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, dam afal pisha ein basar. He says you can have dam even if you don't have basar. Shneimar brings that pasuk in its hemshech. V'dam zvavecha yishofech, and the dam of your offering shall be poured. Uma ani mekayim v'asisa ilasecha basar v'hadam. What therefore do I do with the reisha dekra, which puts basar and dam together? So I explain as follows. Loi malacho, says Rabbi Eliezer. Ma dam bezrika, basar bezrika. Just as the dam has to be sprinkled, has to be thrown on the mizbeach, so too the basar of the korban has to be thrown on the mizbeach. Because when a person, the kohen, is bringing therefore the dam, the korban, the basar, so he has to go up the ramp. Instead of then standing next to the mizbeach and placing the meat on the mizbeach, he has to throw the meat from the top of the kevesh onto the mizbeach. Says the Brisa, Efei Omer, Lul Koton Yesh Ben Kevesh La Mizbeach. There's a small area of space between the ramp and the kevesh whereby they're not connected, to remind the kohen to throw the meat from where he's standing on the kevesh to the mizbeach. So this is the shita of Rabbi Eliezer, that these words over here of dam and basar together are teaching me just as the dam has to be nizrak on the mizbeach, so too the basar has to be nizrak on the mizbeach. Rabbi Yoshua nami haksi v'dam zvarecha hishofech. Now we go to the other part of the pasuk that Rabbi Eliezer explained, means to say that we don't need. He says that we don't need both. He says, in accordance with Rabbi Eliezer, You can even have dam afal pisha ein basar. So what does Rabbi Yeshua do with these words? V'dam yizvavecha yishafech. Omar loch, says Rabbi Yeshua, hakasiv gabei vehabasar toichel. It's written next to it habasar toichel, which means that the basar has to be kayim. If the basar is not kayim, then there's no dam, and therefore he argues on Rabbi Eliezer. On top of ayin zayin amud beis, v'hani trei kroi lamali. Ask the Gemara now, according to Rabbi Yoshua, what do I need both post psukim? After all, isn't it enough to just write it by oila or by shlomim and then learn out one from the other? Says the Gemara, chad be'oila v'chad be'shlomim. We have them both, v'tzricha, and we need both of them. Why? The ikos of Rachmana be'oila. Had the Torah only written this by oila, then hava mina oila dechamira shekain kalil. I would only think that the oila, which has a stringency, the entire thing is a korban oila and it's brought up. Therefore, since the whole thing is brought up and it has this stringency, that's why we say if you don't have the basa, you don't have the dam either. But shlami, I would not know to say that. And if I only had the pasuk written therefore by shlamim and learned the kol of halvachomer to oila, said havamin, I might think adarabba the is behu shtei achilos aval oila de les shtei achilos emoloi. But then I'll say shlomim is something that's unique and stringent in that it has two achilos, one on the mizbeach and the other one by the kohanim. And therefore, I would say that's where we say that if you don't have the basa, you don't have the dam. But therefore, when it comes to the oila, I would not know that is so. Kamash malan, we have to write both of them. And not only do we write both of them and then learn out by the oila and the shlomim, but this is then true also by all other karbonos. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Eliezer nami haksiv ve'habasar toichel. Rabbi Eliezer has to deal with the pasuk that says habasar toichel. What does he do with that? The basar has to be kayim. Says the Gemara, Amar loch hahu mi boy le she'ein habasar mute ba'achila ad she'yizrak adam. That you are not allowed to partake in the eating of the meat until the dam is already sprinkled. Ihochi, asked the Gemara, Ema kule lahochi hu da'asa. If that's so, then say the whole thing is therefore coming to say, Dam afabisha ein bram basar minaylan. Then say the whole thing is coming to teach me that you have to then zorek the dam, and then you can go ahead and eat the basar. Where do we know that the dam, even though there is no basar, is also valid? Omar loch im kein nichtov rachmana habasar teichel v'hodar dam zvachecha yishafich k'dichsi bereisha. Why not then have the wording in reverse, like it says in the reisha of the pasuk? V'asisa oiloisecha habasar adam. Say it in that order. Mai shno da'akte me ledam zvachecha. Why do we first be maktin medam and then talk about the basar? Shma mina dam afa b'she'ein basar. V'shma mina she'ein ha-basar muter ba'achila ad she'yizrok adam. Therefore, we're able to learn two things. Because after all, it doesn't say yishpoch, it says yishofech. That implies that indeed, that we would already know, even if it was in that other order, that would be enough to then have the basar being kaim and the dam. The fact that it says in the reverse order, just like it does, unlike it does in the Reisha, and therefore it mentions in the Pasuk, only in the Reisha does it mention about the Basar and the Dam, and the Sefer mentions the Dam and the Basar. It teaches me two things. Aleph, that the Dam, you have to be Zorek the Dam before you can partake in the Basar. And two, that if I don't have, if I don't have Basar, I still have Dam. Those are the two things that Rabbi Eliezer argues and says we have from this pasuk. Rabbi Yeshua, ein habasar muter ba'achila she'yizrek adam mikal v'chomehu. Rabbi Yeshua says, I learned that from a kal v'chomer that you have to be zorek the dam in order to then allow the meat to then be eaten. Because the kal v'chomer says as follows: Uma amurin dechilesnehu lema'akvei ki isnehu ma'akvei. By emurim, when you don't have the emurim. It's not possible something happened and they can nitma or they became lost, and still it's not ma'akev. The carbon ki isnei ma'akev, and yet when you do have the emurim and you don't put them on mizbeach, it is yes ma'akev the carbon. Then dam the chilesei The dam, when you do not have it, ma'akev, it's ma'akev the carbon, it's ma'akev the basar, ki isei loy kol shekein the ma'akev. When you do have the dam, then certainly it will be ma'akev if you don't go ahead and shoifech the dam. So it's a kal v'chomer. Rabbi Eliezer, milsa da'asi b'kal v'chomer torah v'kosav l'kra. Rabbi Eliezer argues and says enochanami is a kal v'chomer, but we find that the Torah goes out of its way to then write it in the Torah, even though it could be a kal v'chomer. Rabbi Yeshua kol heicha de'ika lemidrash darshinan. Whereas Rabbi Yeshua argues that when you can be darshin it, then you should darshin it, and therefore we have the kal v'chomer. Says the Gemara. Okay. Now let's go back to the original question. Let us say that our Mishnah that says that the tumah is yes doiche, we're doiche, the carbon seaboards are doiche, the tumah, and we said is dechuya, and therefore you need the tzitzim to meratze, and the tzitzim is not yet meratze, however, on the achilos. So therefore, let's say that does not stim with Rabbi Yehoshua Shita, who says that indeed, if you do not have the basar, then you don't have the dam. And here we have that since the dam is not going, the tzitz is not going to be meratze on the achilos, so therefore you don't have the basar, therefore you don't have the dam, whereby it's not a valid korban. So the Gemara says again, the hashtale masin look Rabbi Yoshua. The key on the Omar Bo'in entirety, since according to, we do need it too, that's what the Amorim took on. Aleph vitzit ha'achilos lo meratze. First you need to know that you need the tzitz to meratze. And the tzitz is not meratze na achilos. As heichi osi betuma. How can you go ahead and say that it's doiches at tumah? You don't have the dam, you don't have the miz, and you don't have the basar. Since you don't have the basar, you don't have the dam. Says the Gemara, Filu Teim Rabbi Yoshua. You can even say that our Mishnah can be authored by Rabbi Yehoshua. Kesov Rabbi Yoshua hatzitz meratze ala oilin. Because although he says not meratze on the achilos, but it is meratze on the oilin, the hainu, on the emurin, on the chelev of the korban. That's very good. However, when we're talking about the korbanos, the korban sibur, which have meat and they have chelev, they have emurim. And it comes to the korban oila and the korban and the shtei alechem. The korban oimer is a korban that is a flour offering of barley, which is offered on the second day of Pesach. There's no emurim, there's no chalavim. So too, when it comes to the shtei alechem, which is offered on Shavuos, those two loaves themselves are also not something that has emurim or has chalavim. So what are you going to say, therefore? Amre, they said, Ki Amar Rabbi Yoshua Nami, the ba'in entirety bezvachim, b'menachos loy Amar. That which Rabbi Yoshua said you do need both things, he was talking about bezvachim. However, b'menachos, he wasn't saying that you need. U'menachos loy Amar, you're going to say by menachos, he did not require. Says the Gemara, is that so? Vehatnan, it says nitmu shiyare, avdu shiyare. Shayare. He says if the shayarim were nitma'u, or they were avdu, they got lost. Kemidas Rabbi Eliezer kisheiro. Rabbi Eliezer says that would be still kosher. Kemidas Rabbi Yoshua psula, whereas Rabbi Yoshua would say it's pasul. So you see over here, we're talking about that Rabbi Yeshua says it's pasul. It goes on to say kemidas lo kemida. So you see over here kasha that Rabbi Yoshua does require that both things. And even by when it comes to menachos, because that's what this Mishnah is talking about. Says the Gemara, kemidas v'lo kemidas. It's like his standard and not like his standard. Kemidas Rabbi Yeshua deba in entirety. Indeed, you do need two. You won't need both. V'lo kemidas Rabbi Yeshua deilu Rabbi Yeshua bezvachim. Omar b'menachos. Omar b'menachos loy Omar. But not like Rabbi Yeshua, who requires bezvachim, but not by menachos. Now, this is a different Tana. The ilu high Tana sover afilu b'menachos. This Tana is even more stringent than Rabbi Eliezer. He requires both, even by menachos. Umanu high Tana. Fact the Gemara. Who is this Tana? The koi kavasei or machmet feminei. We don't find such a Tana who is saying even more stringent than the shita of Rabbi Eliezer of Rabbi Yoshua. V'oi Tanya. Further, it states in the Brayso, Rabbi Yosi roya ani as div Rabbi Eliezer b'menachos ubezvachim, puts them together. V'di Rabbi Yoshua b'zvachim v'nochos. And Rabbi Yoshua also b'zvachim v'nochos. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer b'zvachim shaya oimer dam af al pi she'ein shom basar. V'divrei Rabbi Yoshua b'zvachim shaya oimer im ein dam ein basar. Im ein basar ein dam. This needs to be explained because this seems to be an internal stira. But Al Kopanim will take it as face value that we see that indeed Rabbi Yossi is saying that Rabbi Yeshua does put basvachim and menachos together. Div Rabbi Eliezer b'menachos shaya oimer koimetz af al pi she'ein shiarim. V'div Rabbi Yoshua b'menachos shaya oimer im ein koimetz ein shiarim. Im ein shiarim ein koimetz. So therefore, the Gemara rejects this, and therefore at this point is saying that the Mishnah cannot be altered by Rabbi Yoshua. Says the Gemara, no, Elikesov Rabbi Yoshua hatzitz meratze al hachilois. The Gemara now changes what it said before in its original assumption, and says now that Rabbi Yoshua does hold that the tzitz is meratze on achilois. Ihochi, the Gemara challenges this. If that's so, and it's meratze on achilois, whereby it won't be a problem to be doiche es hatuma, and therefore Rabbi Yoshua can go with our Mishnah. Why does then that which we quoted before say that the standard of Rabbi Yeshua is psula? If we're talking about an oimer, after all, the oimer is doicha the tuma. Says the Gemara, we're talking about where either it got lost or it was burnt. On that, he said that it's going to be psula. He wasn't talking about the state when it was tummy, because it's doiches atuma. Ella asked the Gemara, Nitma l'mayim ketoni. So what was Nitma coming to teach? Who was the one who was teaching it? Rabbi Eliezer? Pshita asked the Gemara, if you're coming to say, therefore that was taught by Rabbi Eliezer, that's poshit. As follows. Hashta yesh loima avud v'sarv l'lesnahu. There, in the case of avud v'sarv, and this doesn't exist because it either got lost or burnt, and still machshir Rabbi Eliezer. Then nitma de'isei mi boy. Then when it is there, certainly Rabbi Eliezer would be machshir. So that can't be needed to be taught by Rabbi Eliezer. Ela pshita Rabbi Yoshua viktani psula. Rather, we have to go back and say, indeed, it's altered by Rabbi Yoshua, and he's saying it's possible. Even the case of nitma. V'oid, and further, Tanya Rabbi Yoshua, we have a brayso that states in the name of Rabbi Yoshua, Kol zvachim shebat Torah, bein shenitma basar v'chelev kayom. Whether there's basar is nitma, but there's still chelev, at least a kazayas, or vice versa, then the din, he says, is zarech as adam. Aval nitmu trovayu loy. If they both become tamei, then not. Alma kisav Rabbi Eliezer ein atzitz meratze ala oilin v'la chilos. So we see over here that he holds that it's not meratze, not on the oilin ala chilos. Because if it was, then why would he say that ben shenit machelu basar kayam, or vice versa, right? Zorek es hadam. Elamai, you see from over here that he must hold einat tzitz meratze. Therefore, we're back to saying it must be that Rabbi Yeshua cannot learn like our Mishnah. Ella, the Gemara now tries to then reinstate Rabbi Yeshua. Ella la'olam Rabbi Yeshua he masnisin. Really, you can learn Rabbi Yeshua is indeed the author of our Mishnah. Velokasha is not difficult. Why? Because kan lechatchila kan di'evid. That which he said that is not valid, he's talking about lechatchila. But b'di'evid is valid. And therefore the Gemara is assuming over here that our Mishnah is talking about a situation b'di'evid. Kiyoma Rabbi Yoshua lechatchila di'evid loy. When did Rabbi Yoshua say that's not valid, it's not doiche, the tuma, that's only lechatchila. But b'di'evid it is. And therefore you can shtim with our Mishnah that says that you can indeed bring the carbon. B'di'evid is doiche satuma. And the Gemara now says, where do I know to substantiate that Rabbi Yeshua would say like this? The chiluk, the differentiation between lechatchila and b'di'evid. The shani le Rabbi Yoshua ben lechatchila b'di'evid. What do I know to say this? The Tanya nitma basar oishe nifsal oishe yotze chutz lakloim. He states in a case where the basar became tamei or became pasul, or the kachin that we're talking about was brought outside the azara, outside the curtains. Rabbi Eliezer oimer yizrak. Rabbi Eliezer says you can go ahead and be zarik the dam. Rabbi Yoshua omer lo yizrak. You should not zarik the dam. Umoide Rabbi Yoshua she'im zorak hurtza. However, we see, but b'di'eved, if it was already done, then even Rabbi Yoshua agrees that there is a ritzui. So you see that there's a differentiation between lichatchila and b'di'evid, whereby we're learning that the Mishnah is talking about b'di'evid, therefore it can be authored by Rabbi Yoshua, that says it's doiches hatuma, b'di'evid. Ask the Gemara 2 questions on this. Chada, first of all, the psula, the evid mashma. First of all, when it said psula before, that's masha even b'di'evid. So when Rabbi Yeshua says it's psula, it means even b'di'evid it's possible. V'oid chamisha dvorim boin lechatchila mashma. Our Mishnah is mashma, it's lechatchila, and therefore, how can you say that Rabbi Yeshua goes with our Mishnah and learn that our Mishnah is b'di'evid and therefore it's doiche b'di'evid es atuma? On top of ayin ches amud aleph. Ela loy kasha. The Gemara now wants to finally reinstate and say that the Mishnah could indeed be authored by Rabbi Yeshua as follows: Kan b'yochid, kan b'tzibur. When it comes to the yochid, the individual, lechatchila it's possible, but b'di'evid is going to be a valid korban. That which it states in our Mishnah is talking about a korban b'tzibur, and therefore, in our Mishnah, which is talking about lechatchila, even Rabbi Yoshua would agree that it is doiche. Why? Because we now are changing what we said originally. One of the first hanachas that we had made was that the fact that the korban is doiche es hatuma is because it is the chuya. Now we're coming around by saying that Rabbi Yoshua says that it is hutra. Indeed, that this is hutra, and therefore even lechatchila the korban is doiche es hatuma.